Hola, bienvenidos, welcome. Me llamo Adra Montenegro. Soy un program manager de community groups y KCDs también de CNCF. Mi español es más o menos, so yo presento en inglés. So welcome. I'm here to just take questions today, kind of give you resources on how to prepare KCDs, maybe even community groups, and give you insight from the organizers who have done these all over the world in different countries. And then we have Jose Flores, who is here from El Salvador. He's doing a KCD as well. And then also, we are obviously here in a KCD event too, so you can see how the organizers are doing it themselves for this event. I have Chris Anacek here too. He's presenting more after, but we can combine forces if you have questions that are more about CNCF ecosystem in general. So we can take our time and kind of bounce around different topics if you care to. But yeah, this is just a light session, no slides, and I can start by just giving you a general overview, if you'd like. Okay. So KCDs started in 2020 with the pandemic, and we wanted to have a virtual opportunity to go global and do smaller scale community-led events to offer Kubernetes, among other cloud native topic enablement across the world. And so before me, Bill Mulligan was a community manager with CNCF, and so he kind of launched this program. And I came last year in 2022 to help advance it, spread it, and we've already went from 16 KCDs last year to 30 this year. And we're constantly growing. So it's definitely a community where we have organizers collaborating, bringing new ideas, and then we update our processes. It's the nature of open source, right? So that said, we have our GitHub repository that we're constantly updating with documentation. We're updating our website as well. And then I do monthly meetings with KCD organizers too to just kind of walk you through the process. It can be intimidating to run your own event, 1 to 2 day usually, but we have resources, and that's what CNCF is here for, is to make sure that you feel enabled to do these, because most of you are technical, right? You don't plan events, or maybe you do. Some of you lead communities, and so you have that experience of hosting 1 to 2 hour presentations or meetings at a university like this, or maybe at a cafe or una barra con pizza or whatever. But yeah, it's usually a 3-month process to plan a KCD. Some people are very ahead of the game and do 6 months planning. That's great, because then you can promote even better, get more attendees. And so we start with usually your program committee or your organizers, which can be one and the same for a KCD. So making sure you have at least 3 organizers, hopefully more, and then delegating responsibilities for each person. For example, if you have everybody owning sponsorships, nobody will own it. So you need like one person to just take control of the sponsorship side. Maybe one person to do the fiscal responsibility. So you do charge money for tickets, especially if it's an in-person, but maybe a small fee, because it's a community event, so you want it to be welcoming. So you have somebody managing the money in, money out, especially with sponsorships as well, and those funds that support your event to be at least at a break-even point, so you don't come out of pocket for your event. And then you also want somebody to manage your content. So like Angel Ramirez for KCD Colombia, he's managing the program committee, the content, the lineup, the agenda that we have here among all the different rooms. And then I'm highly encouraging having somebody you know that does marketing. So somebody who can broadcast the save the dates, the venue, just awareness of your KCD in general to make sure that you have attendance for all that hard work that you put in for your event. I can tell you that it gets a little intimidating when you are planning, and you don't see your registration numbers very high, So please know that it is common of human nature, and especially the technical community, to register last minute. So it's a worry that people have for their first time events, but you'll always notice that people will come through, especially if you're doing the work broadcasting your event. So yeah, there's a lot of details along the way. Like I said, you start with your organizers, and then you want to solidify a venue before you secure your dates. And then once you sign that contract with your venue, maybe it's a university, maybe it's a tech hub in your city, then that's when you can announce your KCD and start promoting it. Kind of like a save the date. Maybe some people do early bird pricing. So that means 2 tiers of pricing, one at the lowest, and then you elevate it over time. And then that's when we start coming up with a plan. Okay, so when are you going to launch your CFP, which is your call for proposals? And CNCF enables you with a platform to do that, so you don't have to come out of pocket to pay for that. And then also we talk about your review process. You know, we work backwards from your dates. Okay, so we want to launch the schedule 6 to 8 weeks out from our event. Let's give our committee 1 to 2 weeks to review after that happens, or before that happens. Let's also consider having our speakers have enough time to accept their, or confirm their acceptance. And then maybe leave your CFP before that open 1 to 2 months. So you just, again, work backwards from when you want to start promoting your agenda. And then once your agenda is released, we'll come up with a marketing plan in terms of social media and how CNCF can back you. We have nearly 100,000 followers on both LinkedIn and Twitter. I understand Facebook and Instagram are very common in Latin America, so you can still do that as well, but just know that our main platform that I think is common between Latin America is LinkedIn. So I know KCD Colombia used LinkedIn a lot and Twitter, but that seemed to be the best route for Latin America in terms of us amplifying your support. We also do blog posts. I'm noticing a lot of KCD organizers take advantage of this either in the very beginning, write maybe an 800-word blog post giving your vision of the event, and then we can post it on the CNCF blog for you. Or you can do it after your event to give feedback on how it went, what you would do better next time, what your goal is for the community going forward. And again, we'll help you get that content on the community website. We also have other benefits like, you know, sticker support, training certification vouchers, which Chris put in his keynote today, and discounts for other events like KubeCon, for example. So lastly, we have a platform that supports your website. So that right now is Bevy, and it gives you like a one-page website. You can add your organizers, your speakers, and you could add your sponsors as well. And so this automatically comes from the CNCF community website with a drop-down menu that we link it to. And then some KCDs do their own website and connect it to that Bevy platform, but it doesn't have a good user experience. It allows too many clicks. So some people are using a domain that just leads to that Bevy page. So it's a beautiful URL to promote, for example. So I gave you a lot of information, and there is so much more in terms of details, but I just wanted to see if you have any questions so far, you know, maybe where to start, which is our GitHub repository to review the documentation. And then there are issues there. You could submit an issue, and that's where you put in all the details from organizers to venue to dates. And then we take that issue, review it, and we set up the first launch meeting to walk you through all the steps. So yeah, again, that was a lot of information.
And like, we're not perfect, so if you have ideas on how to improve things, please let us know. Like, we're always, like Audra said, open source is all about iteration and improving collaborative spirit, and we're always looking
Exactly. We have a Slack channel that's exclusive to organizers, and everybody's constantly collaborating, and we'll take that and kind of iterate on the program and make it even better.
And if there's like tools or anything you know about, let us know, because like, you know, we are a global community, and like, you would not believe some of the different stuff that's like, things are different in China, in Europe, in Australia, there's different tools, different ticketing systems, so we're trying to learning and try to standardize as much as possible and make it easier for our global community overall.
Exactly.
I have a question.
Angel.
Something that I really like about what you've done in the CNCF is to explain Kubernetes in the cloud world using the freebie and friends. I honestly, I think that's great.
Children's books.
Children's books, Pippi and Friends.
Can understand. So, now, in terms of the cloud Kubernetes groups and the KCD, what is the ideal? I'm not saying that we should build a book about that, but maybe. But what would be the ideal path for a community to start? Is to start a KCD with a group, or how would be
I mean, community groups seem like a good spot to start because it's a smaller scale, right?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this actually over coffee this morning of like how to tier different like stages of getting involved in the community. If you're familiar with the Kubernetes community, there's a notion of a contributor ladder, right, where you kind of start. So we don't have this for like organizers yet for like events. So I think something we may do is try to make this available where, you know, everyone has different strengths. Some people like are really strong event organizers, right? Or like to do meetups, so they should have that path. Some people may be really good at translations, or some people are very technical. Like we need to kind of find like a golden path maybe for people to kind of grow. But we're all ears. Like, you know, we're trying to take lessons that we have from all the communities that we know and try to distill them centrally. But it is easier if you kind of give us information. Like, this is useful for us to know that we could provide these types of resources down the line.
Yeah. Angel, you have built a really big community online too, so it's great to have that base to market an event like this. And then hopefully we can elevate it to like a Kube Day, and then you know, we go from
You know, other things like universities like this, you know, we're very interested not only in CNCF but the Linux Foundation to partner with universities, because we view it crucial that the next generation of students have to get involved in open source. Because, you know, when I did my schooling, you know, 25 years ago, open source was not really a thing. Like I just worked on Linux because I was like a nerd and liked to hack on Linux at the time. That's how I learned. But I talk to companies like Microsoft, Google. It's very difficult for them to hire from universities because the instruction is more like theoretical or not pragmatic enough for industry. So I think if we could find a way to work more with universities like this, we want to, and especially in, you know, countries in Latin, it seems there's a kind of vibrant sector around students. So we're all ears. Give us ideas, and we're always happy to give students scholarships and education. Like it's all we, you know, are really looking to do.
Yeah, like how do we gather a community of professors, for example, like Sergio in the back that just joined in. He's a professor in Guatemala, and he's running his own KCD as well. It's going to be virtual this year. And so, you know, there are different ways to go about this, and you make it your own. It's community-led, and we're here to support you. Yeah, so go ahead, Jose.
Okay, I'm thinking, I would say 1,000 feet in view. And the idea is about benefits. I'm thinking, because a lot of people is involved in these kind of events, right? Volunteer, speakers, companies, the country. Maybe what could be still great benefits for all the people involved in that? What can we see about the benefits that people involved will have? For example, how will be to have? I don't think how will be to have a KCD in El Salvador. How the country also will benefit to have this kind of event. How the university will benefit from that. Or I as a speaker will benefit. Or as a student, I will be benefit from for this kind of event? Maybe you just go to
I mean, I'm sure Chris can speak to this better, but if you're looking at that 1,000 foot per view, you're trying to enable a country to move faster, right? The organizations to have OSPOs, an open source program office, to where their developers can iterate faster and move faster. And so this only advances a company, for example, and then those companies can advance the city or the greater country. Speakers, this is great enablement to elevate people's voices and then push them through a path that can get them to eventually speak or mentor through the CNCF program as well. And like you could become an ambassador, like Angel over here as well.
I mean, if I kind of understand your question a little bit, like, you know, I think it's like the world thrives on incentive structures, right? And, you know, if the incentives for students or organizers are, this will help my career, or I get a scholarship to attend a KubeCon that will help my career, like we're all open to ideas. You know, if they're, you know, for organizers, we try to do our best to help, but, you know, we could potentially do a thing where, hey, organizers get free training, or they get a free, you know, scholarship to attend a KubeCon. Like, we're all open to ideas. We're still kind of evolving things because, you know, a lot of people sometimes do it for just the community aspects. Like, I love to give back and so on, which is great, but there should be, you know, benefits to do so. It shouldn't purely be charitable, right? We're all kind of driven by, you know, incentives, whether it's educating ourselves, our peers, growing our careers. So if you could kind of give us ideas to, you know, help all y'all, we're happy to do it. It's very easy for us. Like, I'm very passionate about students and training them, so I'm always like, let's give them scholarships and free training. But for folks that are like new to industry, you know, let me know what's most important, you know, to you. And if you're organizing a KCD, I know it's a very it's a struggle if it's your first time. Like, holy crap, how do I deal with like I'm a banker, I'm a marketer, I'm like CFO, and like you kind of have to do everything. So let us know how we could help, and we'll provide more resources for all y'all. But yeah, we want to give more incentives. Just let us know what you need.
We're constantly looking into multiple platforms and templates, and just to make it a lot easier for you. So again, it's growing pains as we grow. It's how do we make it easier for the organizers, and then more incentives. Like he said, right now we do the training coupons, and then the KubeCon discounts, you know, for organizers specifically, and then a smaller discount for attendees.
Yeah, we're kicking out like, you know, potential scholarships for organizers. You know, maybe one or two get to pick a
Excuse me, please.
Oh, sorry.
I know. I love to be. I have a technical difficulty day for speaking. So, like, you know, I think for organizers, we're thinking of like, hey, maybe each organizer, you know, one or two could like pick a KubeCon that you want to attend, and we'll help, you know, pay you a scholarship. But we're all trying to kind of figure out what works, because some people may like that, others may not. So we just kind of need to hear from you, and I'm sure Audra will put together surveys and other stuff and kind of work with all y'all to kind of get feedback on what's important for y'all. Because like we've met so many people over the world, and like everyone has different things that are important to them. Unfortunately, yeah, that's the challenge we kind of face. It's like this huge puzzle where it's like, all right, you know, we're a global nonprofit, but we're pretty small compared to, you know, the Microsofts of the world, and so we always try to do the best we can with the resources we have. But it's it's always a little bit tough for us.
Bienvenidos, welcome. Any other questions so far?
Yeah, I believe a huge incentive for students. Yeah, I believe there's a huge incentive for students to come to these conferences for really quality speakers, really great minds that have forward thoughts, like where the world is going, right? How can you ensure great speakers and diversity in the thoughts that come to these conferences as someone who's planning maybe one of these?
Thank you for your question. So ensure quality speakers and diverse information or content, as well as diverse organizations too. And that all starts with the program committee. So that's actually one of our standards, is to make sure all the organizers don't come from one company, first of all. Maybe one of them is a CNCF member or ambassador. And CNCF prides themselves on providing vendor neutral content, right? So it's not all going to come from one company. In terms of quality speakers, that's where the review process comes in, is when you have your call for proposals, right? There's a certain grading scale that happens. And for each KCD, it's different. Maybe it's a star rating scale, and then you've got comments. And maybe you have 2 review processes as well. We also we highly encourage diversity from the very beginning, and that means at least the common meaning of diversity across all countries is, not only non-male speakers, right? Because we're coming from many different cultures. In the US, we talk about cultural diversity a lot. But the common goal across all countries is not only all male speakers, but also, like you said, diversity of content from different organizations as well. Or maybe professors are speaking too. So then there's a different level of talk or a different track, if you will. So each KCD might decide, okay, I want a track that focuses on this topic area. I want keynotes to be more like high level and something that can apply to everybody. And so, again, going back to your question, to assure quality, it's all from the program committee and review process of the program itself. Yeah. Mm-hmm. How are we doing on time? Because we're kind of joining our session in one. Yeah. Hold on, let me give you the microphone.
Okay. About the KCDs in Latin America, because we have maybe a couple of KCDs opening also, but how can we motivate, or how can CNCF can motivate to have more KCDs in another countries, on another communities around the Latin America, for example?
I think what we've seen so far is people broadcasting their success rates with KCDs, whether it's a blog post or going to KubeCon and speaking about it at a session. And that's why we noticed people doubling, or the KCDs doubling nearly from last year to this year, is just the benefits that have come out of it and the building of the community, and then the gratification that comes of it as well. So far, that's what I've seen personally in the feedback that I've received. But Chris might have some additions.
I think like right now it's been very mostly organic, right? People in the community are like, hey, I live in El Salvador and I want to go organize something, right? And that's very naturally organic, and they're part of the community. We haven't done much let's call it like push, like actually proactively reach out in specific countries across LATAM. So it could be a thing where right now our goals for CNCF over the next kind of 18 to 24 months are very global focused. We kind of want to expand our footprint out of the, let's call it, existing geographies that we have biased, right? We started in the US, so obviously we're biased to North America. We've done a little bit in Europe, and obviously we're in China, so we're trying to go outside of that. And kind of for my presentation today, if you looked at the overall IT spend globally, it almost maps to that directly. So we're looking to invest in those regions that are starting to come up. And I think from a CNCF perspective, we'll staff up and kind of continue making those investments, and maybe even hire people. Audra and I were talking this morning about hey, maybe we'll have KCD folks represented for regions, right? Maybe one for APAC, one for LATAM, one for, and at the end of the day, like with any problem, if you don't have someone fully dedicated to it, it generally doesn't get done. So we're kind of still experimenting in our mind. We also kind of discussed one thing that open source does really well, especially the Kubernetes community, is this notion of a contributor ladder. Can we have something similar for KCDs, right? Where maybe KCD, the basic one, is a sandbox project, right? Maybe a Cube Day, you graduate to a Cube Day, and this is incubating, right? And then KubeCon is the graduated project. And so we're thinking of how can we give organizers this kind of path to start and evolve and get more support from us. So we're still very much in the ideation phase. I think a lot of people don't realize that CNCF, we're only about 30 or so employees overall in the organization, and I would say more than half of those are dedicated to just KubeCon, because KubeCon is a huge mess to put on. So we're a very small staff overall, and we're trying to do the best we can. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and then we have the ambassador program with 155 ambassadors this year that Katie Greenlee revamped, and so it's really nice to have that extension of CNCF, right? So you're making cloud native ubiquitous, right?
We have more people now, so which is good.
I have a question. I would like to understand on the CNCF agenda, what is the plan to help organizers to maintain their communities? Because I remember before 2020, there was a number of communities here in Hispanics, but during the pandemics, most of them actually died. Yeah. If you go to the map, you will see the points there, but there is no people. There is still maintaining it. I would like to understand what are the position of the CNCF about helping those organizers to keep the communities, and what would be the recommendation for you to keep them alive?
Something that I like to see is within a region, multiple cities coming together and collaborate. So you have an organizer, for example, I just had a meeting with some UK organizers last week, and there's Cloud Native London, for example, but then there's Edinburgh, and then there's Manchester, Glasgow, and so I had a meeting getting all these organizers together to have one common goal and to help each other with speakers and promote each other's cloud native community groups. There's this concept of a tour that you could do as well. So our Cloud Native Nordics group is doing that among different cities as well. So if you're struggling in one city to really expand, I think it's a matter of touching base with organizers from other cities and again, kind of promoting each other's community groups and then bringing awareness in terms of getting people there, right? So it might be a larger issue, like the programs and the universities aren't supporting it, so there's just no awareness whatsoever. And so that's where it starts, is bringing the awareness of open source and cloud native and what it means to advance your career, what it means to advance your organization.
Yeah, we're doing our best also, part of it is, during the pandemic, it was a weird, time, right? And so all physical meetings stopped. The economy got a little bit weird, where we're kind of in this recession, so people started to spend, less money. And so part of it is our fault. We're, just like open source projects, you sometimes have stale pull requests, right? Because maybe the maintainers went away or disappeared. We're doing our best to kind of clean up some of the existing meetups and community groups to kind of at least if they're not being active, we should formally shut them down and then try to reboot, because sometimes people hold on to this and they don't give up. Maybe there's a new organizer that come in. So I think part of it is coming up with maybe a process. If we're gonna hey, maybe someone in Guadalajara in Mexico had a thing and it shut down and no one's doing it, we should gracefully shut down and maybe ask for someone else to come in. So I think internally we have to maybe come up with processes to kind of help these inactive things. And one of my goals, at least at the end of this year, with all the growth with KCDs, is we're going to do kind of a formal review of all right, which regions have been very active, right? And then that's great. And then find the ones that may have not been active and try to get them booted up next year, because we're truly kind of dealing with this crazy growth. We have a very, very small team, and then we have 30 plus KCDs now that have popped up, and we're all trying to figure out where to invest our resources wisely.
Yeah, so you might know we went from Meetup to Bevy in 2020, and so a lot of people were lacking the enablement. And so, like Chris said, we did that cleanup, and now we're seeing people get active again. And it's okay, right now we're at 140 plus community groups, whereas before it was, I think, 300. Yeah, and so it's just getting that consolidated and cleaned up, and then re-enabling people who did have meetups before and they kind of shut down. But yeah, it's definitely a process.
And coming up with the right incentives. We have a lot of good benefits now. Maybe we could do more.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, Angel.
I have a comment, but because I've been involved in the CNCF for quite a while, in different ways, and definitely I had to say that since we met with Audra, it's been completely different stories. She's done a great job. I have to say that.
It was my fault. I was the organizer for like ambassadors, KCDs, and then we hired you.
No.
I take the blame.
No, but I mean, she's done a great job. The path for building this KCD, it was very clear. Since day one, she had all organized, and we had this GitHub page where we were following through every single step, and it did make the process very easy. I know there's always room for improvement. I just wanted to make the comment that before I was trying to get some of these phrases, but it was a little confusing. But I understand. It's also because there was a lot of moving pieces, and it had to be all put in a row. But I just wanted to make a comment that Aldo has done a great job, and I'm proud that we were able to go from a meetup in Medellin to now a KCD. So thank you for that. And I know that we're kind of blending a little bit with the CNCF questions. So I know that we might talk about this later, but what could be a good plan? What's the plan that CNCF may have in LATAM? Because and I'm going to focus the question more into like, I think it's kind of like a chicken and egg. Like, if companies are not responding to open source, then the open source community is hard to grow, right? Because I might be an employee somewhere and say, oh, I want to use X, Y, and Z, any project. But my company might not support that, or maybe don't have the mentality. So how can CNCF help a little bit more on that side, so as employees we can say, you know what, we can do this?
So the kind of question is like, how can CNCF help, LATAM accelerate cloud native open source? With my Linux Foundation hat for many years, every region is different. Like in the US, at least, I would say corporations kind of drove the initial kind of move, a subset of them, and kind of helped shape things. Universities were actually very slow to adopt, and still pretty slow. In Europe, actually a bit of the opposite. I think the universities were very, very much ahead of pushing and training open source, and so that kind of how open source flourished. There, China is like government mandate. It's a whole different, whole different story. So for us, it's kind of like understanding like what would be the best, entry point for us, and we kind of have programs for these different things. So for example, Linux Foundation, a lot of times we meet a company, right? Let's call it a bank, right? Everyone loves banks. Their engineers literally cannot contribute to any open source project without having like a vice president or someone like legitly sign off on like imagine making a documentation improvement to Kubernetes, you have to go for freaking VP. So this is impossible to so we actually have we have lawyers on staff that will provide training. So sometimes what happens is, we have a community member, they work at a bank, and they're like, oh, can you really help train our lawyers of what modern practices are around risk management? And so we have Linux Foundation Legal Network, and we do events for lawyers specifically that we could go push those things. For other cases, sometimes we partner with governments, right? We've done meetings with the EU, US, China, and we'll kind of give them overall training and like, here's where the industry is going, here's where you should invest, here's how other people do it, and sometimes that works. It's going to be different for us, and part of it is just understanding what the best approach may be. One of my goals, at least over the next 24 months, is I would love to have a very large open source and KubeCon style event for LATAM in general, because if you kind of look at other parts of the world, there generally are open source summits, right? And like having a big event is useful. Right now I see a lot of the events focused on a vertical, like I'm an old Java guy, right? Brazil, I spent a lot of time in my early career. Brazil has a very, very strong Java, community there, but that's just Java, less open source. So maybe we all work together and try to do an open source LATAM event and kind of start training there. So I think it's going to take, us to learn a little bit what is the right, step. Partnerships, whether it's government, industry, and lawyers. There's many, or academia sometimes works if you have very motivated professors that could only work through their system. So we're going to do our best, and we actually rely everyone in this room to kind of help out. We have the advantage of being connected to many, many companies. So when it comes to sponsors and fiscal stuff, we could help a little bit for sure, but we're gonna have to rely on you. So if you have lawyers blocking pull requests, send them to us. We will educate.
So just to clarify, it's not limited to just like CNCF. It could be CNCF, Linux,
Yeah.
any of the umbrella.
Correct. Yeah. So
Obviously I spend 80% of my time with CNCF, but the other 20% is Linux Foundation. So we help spin up things like GraphQL Foundation, a whole different community, PyTorch Foundation. We're actually doing a lot of work with AI now. I'm spending a big chunk of my time right now spinning up a new organization around AI stuff. So it's like, it's going to depend. The Linux Foundation is much larger than purely cloud, but CNCF is the largest organization within the Linux Foundation, and cloud is the most important thing for a lot of businesses, these days. And I'm still getting education on, cloud adoption in LATAM. As I understand it, it's probably very similar to. China's a little bit weird, where there's a big on-prem mainframe traditional business, let's say, serviced by very large traditional companies, right? And I think that's probably it's probably very similar, here. And even in in China, the government's like, you must move to cloud, and it's still very slow. And it's hard when you have a very small set of companies that kind of, I don't want to say monopolize, but they like control most of the kind of contracts, and you don't have like a small set of startups or consultancies to kind of help things go. So it's very kind of complicated, at the end of the day. But government here and universities could have a role to push, things. If there was kind of, China has like government programs of like must move to cloud, open source, prioritize AI, and that helps transition things, even though there is a large segment of large companies that still want to keep the old, mainframe on-prem style business, flowing. So, but educate us, because I think even in LATAM, I'm sure each country, is different. I spent a lot of time in Mexico. I understand that ecosystem decently, but the rest of LATAM, I am completely, blind to.
You're setting a good startup example.
Yeah.
For example.
Yep, exactly. You have a great little startup that is trying to do your best, and I'm sure you're competing with the big players, but it's good.
Competition is always good.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions? How are we on time?
I think we have probably 20 minutes or so, roughly. Till
Yeah, you're right, 11:15.
Yeah, I mean, we're happy to answer any questions, and if there's, hey, you need help with a particular project, or hey, can you invite Kelsey Hightower to come speak? Like, feel free to ask anything, and we'll do our best. Yeah.
So, following up on that last question, as you said, each region is different, but in the case of Latin America, even if each country is different, what does dominate is IT is mostly, most of the IT and people who work in IT in Latin America work for IT services companies, right? For the Globant, Wiseline, Softtech, all those. So I know that, for example, I suppose that may be similar as in India, for example. So what can we learn in terms of like how CNCF or how an open source, what do you guys do to promote contribution, especially to open source in this context, right? Because in IT services companies, it's difficult for employees who work in IT services companies to contribute to open source. There's not much culture. The managers are like, dude, I'm not invoicing that, so no, you don't have any time for that. So are there any lessons that we can learn from regions where there's a mostly IT services dominated environment?
Yeah. So in India, we could use that one because I was involved in a lot of discussion. Like we've been meeting with a variety of Indian, companies, HCL, Infosys, Renaissance Group, Tata, all these folks, for many, many years, completely didn't understand really the value of kind of contributing open source. It wasn't until they started to get some kind of customers and kind of government support to kind of move to these things. And part of it was let's call it, I don't say like techno-nationalism, but like Microsoft, Oracle, all these companies were, starting to eat up more and more business in some ways, and a lot of it was due because they actually had the latest cloud native open source expertise. And so Infosys HCL basically decided like we have to get this business. So they like embarked on programs to go train and educate and certify people internally, because it was a competitive business dynamic, because they were, we don't like North American companies fully dominating the whole ecosystem, so we need to go our own regional thing. The lesson there is, it took a lot of painful discussions, but eventually I think that was the thing that drove it. Was like, we need to grow our own local ecosystem here, because Microsoft, Google, or Amazon mostly were, Oracle, essentially IBM were chipping away at the local regional thing. So I don't know if that's like a useful lesson, but like literally many meetings of us going back there, and just like they completely ignored the problem until I think the government there was like, we need to build a local, big, local ecosystem here. We need to have our own clouds and so on. So that was part of it. And I don't know if the similar thing applies here in LATAM. Like in Europe, for example, there's a big movement around data sovereignty, digital sovereignty, right? Have local clouds, because, it's great that Microsoft has a data center, maybe in Medellin or wherever, right? Or Santiago, but still, not, a local thing. So I think you need to support both. And in the EU, for example, India is also going through a similar thing. Is they're actually passing laws and regulation that they're basically mandating multi-cloud, and multi-cloud means something local, like local provider, like an OVH, like a French thing, and then you could also use Microsoft if you want to, but architect it for local cloud first, and then you could use whatever hell you want. But that was like that's mostly driven by like EU's like government, regulated basis. India was in competitive business dynamics with a small dash of government. So I don't know how to apply those lessons out here. Like, we're happy to talk to Cognizant and some of the larger consulting, and we're global, and we're just intro us, and we're happy to have conversations, but yeah. Más preguntas? Sí.
Hey, yeah, one of the challenges for an open source project when it starts to scale and grow is how to handle mentorship for new contributors. And sometimes there's no formal process for that. Maintainers are not trained to do so. So I was wondering if you're aware of any program from Linux Foundation or anything that will help us how to provide resources for maintainers to have a more formal mentorship process for new contributors.
I know in GitHub we have a couple of mentorship programs where we link to the LFX mentorship program, also Google Summer of Code, and Open Outreachy, yeah.
So I'm trying to think about how to slot it.
So right now, our current approach is like we have a variety of mentoring programs, right, that generally are modeled after kind of how Summer of Code worked, where, hey, you have a term, let's say 2 months, 3 months, you get a stipend, right, that pays the mentee. The problem is, like, we're not throwing money at the problem. Like, we have budget for like stipends for mentees, but training of mentors, and maintainers are generally busy. You're asking a maintainer who probably has feature work to go mentor a student, unless you really love working with students and like teaching them how Git works, and sometimes it's tough. So I don't have a solution yet. I'm open for ideas. Like, we could probably have like mentor programs for mentors and helping them, have better skills there. Sometimes we try to convince companies. We've been going on this circuit where, how if you're an SRE or sysadmin in your life, you're probably familiar with an on-call rotation, right? You're like, hey, this week or 2 weeks, I'm gonna babysit these things. We're trying to convince companies to have on-call rotation for mentorships and open source, and just make it part of your job. But every company is different. Some people understand this. Many do not, unfortunately. But we have money for mentees, but for mentors, it's a little bit tough.
So following up on that, and in our case, our experience is that, we have surveys and data on why do local people, or what would help local people contribute more to open source projects. And one of the things that we've seen is that it does help a lot to personally know a maintainer in a project, right? Like even if it was like in a face-to-face workshop, a contribution sprint, something where you get like, oh yeah, I know that if I get stuck with something, I can ask this guy and they'll help me out. So my question is, or how can we make it happen? For KCDs like this, I mean, it would be awesome that in a KCD like this, we have people from open source projects come and do contribution sprints and lead those. And, but I understand that, I mean, is there budget in the CNCF to help because the travel expenses are usually the difficult part, you know, especially this year where nobody is paying travel expenses and all companies are yeah, I know. I organize conferences and it's a struggle. Is there some way to get CNCF to help cover travel expenses? So for these cases, like, hey, we want to send somebody from Argo CD to lead a contribution sprint in this, because we know that this year employers are not paying that.
So the question was, like, does CNCF have resources to, if we were going to do maintainer sprints or, you know, contributor workshops? So we do have, like, you know, for example, for ambassadors, we do have set budget available. Like, an ambassador wants to go travel and teach something, you could actually go ask. Like, it's literally part of the benefits. Like, if you're like, hey, I'm going to go teach a workshop in, you know, Guadalajara, sure, we'll like to ask us, we'll happily, you know, pay for it. There is a kind of a budget set aside for that. I do like the idea of potentially having like part of every KCD, or maybe optional, that like, hey, there is budget reserved for like to fly in maintainers or ambassadors to do like a contributor workshop. Because you look at the talks, like a lot of them are good, like great Argo CD and maybe intro to Fluent, but there's a difference between a 30-minute to an hour talk and then maybe like a 6-hour workshop of helping someone maybe with their first contribution. So I mean, that's a good idea, and like we'll see if we could do that and just make that as a maybe part of the KCD organization template, and then make sure to let organizers know that like, hey, maybe we'll have an Argo maintainer or Crossplane maintainer or Linkerd maintainer, and we could you know, fly them in, you know, for that, and kind of have some budget reserve. Like, that is a no-brainer. We have a good amount of budget for scholarships and kind of education reserved on the side. I think the challenge we face is a lot of people want to come to KubeCon more than, say, local KCD. So, but if the organizer, you find a maintainer, or you say like, hey, we would really like someone to come, we'll do our best. But yeah, the budget's there, especially for ambassadors and maintainers. We have separate budgets available.
Yeah, so there are some KCDs that do host workshops ahead of the main event, whether it's in person or virtual. Sometimes there's hackathons ramping up to the event as well. And then there's also the opportunity of having that as part of your sponsorship prospectus in terms of a package. So sponsor a workshop, for example. And so that's a lot. The budget can come from there too, in addition to the ambassador budget. Yeah, and again, we help build prospectuses and stuff. So.
Yeah, you can ask us for money. Like, hey, I want to go teach something.
Okay.
And we have others that do this.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to get that kind of reimbursement.
No, let us know. Like, for example, if you were to come here to teach a workshop,
yeah,
you would have easily paid for your travel. Just let us know. Yeah. Sometimes people are shy. So. I mean, if you came here to talk and you needed the support as an ambassador, like, let us know. We'll send us the receipts. We'll approve. So, it's ambassador done.
Interesting. Well, maybe a question. I want to see more like a kind of students programs, more Spanish based, more or less, because I think that there are a lot of universities, and I know that there is the Google Summer of Code and the LFX and that kind of things. But sometimes I know that the English is the main language for all the things, but we have a lot of talent in LATAM, and the problem sometimes is the language. I mean, it's not an excuse, but we are losing students because just for the language. So how, or what are the next steps of what we are coming to see in the future about the students program? For example, I have my personal experience when you started to create this Cloud Native group about students.
Yes.
I felt a little bit moved apart a little bit because we are like Latam, and they was like the students program more focusing on India. I was like, well, okay, they don't need me there. Let's do it in other side. So, how or what we are going to expect about that kind of, or how the students program is going to evolve in that way to get more students of other country involved.
Question too is in terms of language, sorry, but like your opinion, right? You're a professor. A lot of technical terms are in English, so there's no translation for them. So how do you think your students would best receive content if it's like a hybrid language, for example?
Yeah, no, it's like, so like obviously the community in India is very like active, right? And I think Summer Code has done very well there. And like, you know, people in open source, people who shows up first kind of like sets, you know, the context. I think from a CNCF perspective, we always kind of deal with these like complicated global things, like, you know, trying to host, you know, for example, an event in India or China. It's always like each city fighting over like where you should go, you know, host things, and they have like their own special needs. Like for China, for example, we have a separate team for APAC, right? And, you know, we have a team in Europe now. I think what eventually we need to do probably in CNCF is probably have a, you know, a team or a person maybe dedicated for, you know, LATAM, and kind of work with you and others to kind of see what works. Because otherwise it's like, it's going to be dominated by who shows up. And that's just kind of how it works. If you don't have like an ambassador or a person that you work with directly, it becomes a little bit more difficult. In terms of the language, you know, for a lot of our training and certification, we kind of follow a process where obviously we start with English, and then we kind of do translations next. And it's usually like Chinese, then Japanese, and then you know, whatever else. But that's kind of the order. And you know, Spanish, you know, generally comes much later. But if that was very important to you as a professor, community members, we could prioritize that. Like, we have resources available, but it tends to be lower on our list. And maybe that's the artifact of why there are less, you know, certs and trainings in this particular part of the world. But if that's important to you, let us know. We'll happily, you know, do it. It takes time, unfortunately, to do it. Yeah. Yeah, the glossary was en español very quickly, which was nice.
Yeah, that helps. No, but I guess it's not a question, just a follow-up comment. Sorry. But no, I mean, just so my experience when I spoken. So like 8 years ago, the Pamela Fox was doing, and that she was working with Khan Academy.
Yes.
She was doing the learning to program course at Khan Academy, and she asked me, "Hey, I want to do the course in Spanish."
Yes.
Which, by the way, she has a great story of how she learned Spanish, but that's another story. She went to Costa Rica for 3 months, and the boy who sold her fruit taught her Spanish. So yeah, but anyway, what she told me was, I'm trying to convince the people here to do the learning to program course in Spanish, but they say that all the developers in Mexico already, or in Latin America already know English, so there's no point in it. And I was like, no, that's completely. So, I mean, our experience is probably as a consequence of our governments going and saying, oh yeah, in Latin America everybody speaks English, don't worry. Probably companies get that idea that, you know, or also they say like, well, people in tech already speak English, so there's no point in making materials in Spanish. But it's not like that. I mean, there's lots of, so if we do that, we are only increasing the gap. Right. We only continue increasing the gap. So if we want to reduce that gap, yeah, it will help a lot. And I know an issue is getting also people to help with that translations, right? I mean, that's like, we need to go. So yeah, I mean, I guess, I know that Kubernetes, there's a Kubernetes translation to Spanish group, and I don't know if there's formally more efforts like that so that professionals, English and Spanish speaking professionals can help contribute with that.
for the other countries I mentioned, like in Japan and China, we actually have professionals that we compensate to do, these translations, and we could do the same for Spanish, but it generally comes, maybe it's our inherent bias, but for example, in China and Japan is actually a unique case where, Japan, most people speak English. Like developers for sure speak English, but they are refuse to take the certification or training unless it's actually in Japanese. So we always and there's a very vibrant training and certification ecosystem, there. But if maybe the idea here is we have we have Kubernetes training partners, right? Maybe we have translation partners that could help us in different regions that we could actually go compensate folks for, hey, if you want to, we're launching a new certification around Kubernetes certified security associate, right? Security is so important to everyone. That will start in English, but we would love to have that eventually in Espanol, and if we could have a bench of folks that we could go pay to do this, we'd happily take care of it. But for us, it's kind of to learn, because I inherently have some bias where as a developer, if you're programming, you obviously know a bit of English, and I've spent enough time in LATAM that English is something, but the world is not completely flat, and people come from different backgrounds, so we should support people that are still kind of growing their career.
And to add onto what Chris said is, you can have a community group that's not just a typical speaker and audience, right? So it could be a working session. It can be virtual, which our platform supports too if people can't make it there. But this is a good opportunity to almost crowdsource for those people and have a specific topic like Cloud Native Glossary Working Group in LATAM. And then just get creative with kind of the crowdsourcing of these people who want to dedicate their time. But yeah, again, it doesn't have to be traditional speaker audience. It can be, there's so many creative ways to host a meetup.
Yeah, I really like your, I feel like we could actually use our global community groups and, Kubernetes, KCD program to help with this. And, maybe each KCD, there could be a workshop and help us translate a specific thing, and we could help people compensate for the time. So this idea is already kind of going in my mind of how to make this work. Yeah.
One of the things that I've seen work well in the US and in Europe is the incorporation of people from communications majors into tech, right? And in endeavor advocacy, in technical writing and all that. I get in other regions like in Latin America, I haven't seen that much, and it's a good opportunity, and something like get them involved in technical writing and translation just as a opening door would be great, right? I mean, and yeah, probably getting involved in translation would be great. So yeah, let's do that.
It's an incredible career. Tech writing is very well compensated now, and people need folks. And you could be from a marketing background. You don't have to necessarily be fully technical. You can learn. So it's a good career path for sure.
Estoy acaparando el micrófono. 5 minutos.
Okay, I have one last question. You mentioned a lot of the ambassador program. You mentioned about the benefits, but I would like you to enlighten us about the responsibilities of being an ambassador, and how can we become an ambassador in our countries.
So with my collaboration with Katie Greenlee, she holds monthly working groups with ambassadors, and it's to hold the high standards in terms of their contribution. So are they a mentor? Are they hosting a community group? Are they part of a KCD? And so there are certain standards to hold your ambassadorship. And then it's also a 2 times a year application process now. So instead of just once a year, we're going to do another application process in September. Yeah, and so the fact that she's hosting these monthly meetings is kind of keeping these ambassadors accountable in terms of their contributions to maintain their ambassadorship. Yeah.
I think we were pretty, I helped start the ambassador program, and then, eventually the pandemic hit, right? And I was for a while, we're well, let's be kind, because who knows what the hell's going on in the world, and let's not demand too much from people. But now that we're kind of, in the endemic phase, we're trying to give people more opportunities to like, Audra mentioned like the basic minimum that we expect, but for benefits, we're looking like if you want to go speak somewhere else about cloud native or a project, like let us know. We'd happily go fund your travel. We do expect some of our ambassadors to go not only speak in their like local city, but maybe a neighboring country or some other part. Like let us know how we could kind of help. There are some basic minimum standards that we expect, but if you're out there speaking, contributing, we're generally as happy, as we could be. We just tried to formalize the program now where, you have usually folks that essentially apply a couple times a year. It's a year term that you're ambassador, and then you kind of renew. It's pretty similar to how like Microsoft has its MVP program, and we're just trying to like operationalize it and professionalize it a little bit more. And we're always open for ideas for benefits. Like Sergio was like, didn't know I could get like scholarship to go, travel somewhere, pay for me to go speak. We're happy to kind of do that type of thing. So work with us to improve the program. It's basically the community's program, and we're just kind of the steward here looking to work with all you. Exactly. Yeah. No, more ambassadors are good. And we're trying to be very deliberate about having ambassadors represent different geographies and kind of different projects, so it's not just biased to like one company or one project. One of my original sins was I think the early ambassador program was very Kubernetes centric, because that's kind of how CNCF was, and we've kind of done a much better job, I think, of diversifying things overall. Cool. I think we're basically at time, but thank you everyone for doing this. It's nice to see KCD in Colombia being very successful, and hopefully this will continue to grow, and maybe in El Salvador, Guatemala, potentially. Chile, I am overdue to visit Chile, so I would definitely love to see something. Yeah, exactly. But good. So thank you again for the support, and like honestly, don't be shy. Like some people are like, send me an email, send me a Twitter message. Like we're generally very open and friendly. Sometimes people are just very shy. Sometimes of like, oh, I don't want to go talk to this person. Well, it's open source, so like it's mostly all open. So just go talk. Send us a message. We're all like everyone is very responsive, and if they're not responsive, let me know. If Audra doesn't answer your messages, I would like to know. All right, no, she's great. She's great.
KCD at CNCF.io. That's a KCD at CNCF.io is where two of us are on that, and we can answer your questions.